Hey everyone! So, Shadowlands' first patch is out, but what does 9.0.5 actually bring to the table? Does it add content? Does it fix problems? And most importantly, is it something that is worth coming back for? Well, no, yes, maybe. You'll learn through the video. Straight from the horse's mouth, 9.0.5 is focused on improving systems and rewards, as well as Covenant and Legendary tuning. So, it is a stopgap, intended to make Shadowlands basically much better to play, while Blizzard go ahead and work on patch 9.1, which is going to be the major patch. So here today is everything you need to know about 9.0.5 in one handy package, and what it means for your Shadowlands experience. An experience that is made better with today's sponsor, GlassesUSA.com, who cut out the middleman, helped me be able to actually see the game, and have great things like the awesome virtual mirror system that lets you easily compare dozens of frames. And of course, it's also where you'll find a great deal at that link down below. They take all the hassle, the lack of options, and much of the expense via cutting out the middleman, and they just basically make it easier being a glasses wearer. So head up GlassesUSA.com with my link down below. Big thank you to them, and with that said, let's get into 9.0.5. First things first, Valor is back. Now, of course, we do have our full gearing guide up, but for a quick overview, just so you basically get the TLDR, Valor is basically a PvE version of the current PvP gearing system. You earn Valor points up to a cap from doing callings and Mythic Plus dungeons, and then you spend it on, of course, upgrading items that drop from those Mythic Plus dungeons. Now, you can upgrade each item to a maximum that depends on your highest Keystone achievement, and if you've done Keystone Master, then that cap will be eye level 220. That's right, no more getting a great dungeon trinket at a low item level and then being mad about it, because in this system, well, if you get an item level 207 Inscrutable Quantum Device, you can just upgrade it all the way up to 220. Now, to call this an improvement, I think, is an understatement. This means that you can actually work towards BIS from Mythic Plus, right? Like, you've actually got a path to BIS instead of just having to roll the dice over and over and over again. So, pretty good. Now, this is not the only buff to dungeon loot. That is because failing to complete a key in time now gives you 2 bits of loot instead of 1. The catch here is that one piece will be 1 key level lower than the other. Now, this should make it such that failing a key will feel a lot better than before. Just hopefully removing that, wasted time feeling that happens whenever a high key goes wrong. And of course, remember, with the Valor system, getting an item that's, 1 key lower, that doesn't mean that item is useless, because if it's a good item that you want with great stats, you can just upgrade it. Now, while we're talking about Mythic Plus, let's talk about the actual keys themselves. You see, Blizzard were originally going to restore the old key degradation functionality of Mythic Keystones. So, instead of always getting a key 1 level below your highest clear, it would keep degrading every week by 1 unless you completed it. Now, when announced, this drew a lot of ire from the community because it would basically punish people who could not play every week on every character. But thankfully, they've promised changes. For now, though, the plan is that you'll actually get the same key as your highest for 1 week, and then it will start to degrade after that. So this is kind of interesting. It solves the problem of needing to re-level a key every week, but it does keep the problem of, a key degrading when you don't have the time to play, albeit a little bit less so. So it is an improvement, but it does feel like a bit of a compromise between, I think, what a bunch of the Mythic Plus players want and maybe some of Blizzard's ideas. And then back to loot. Raiding actually gets some love here. The Great Vault's raid track will now only require 3, 6, and 9 kills instead of 3, 7, and 10. Now, this would have been sorely welcome back when we were progressing on Denathrius, wouldn't it? But it'll definitely help out, raiding guilds next tier and those who have yet to progress past him. Now, remember, this comes on top of a hotfix that increased raid loot by about a third back in February. Much more importantly, though, Castle Nathria will now drop potency conduits. And that's great, because for far too many classes, important potency conduit upgrades were actually locked behind doing the expensive Venari conduit lottery in the Maw. Now, you'll just be able to get higher item level conduits by raiding, so I think that's way better. Honestly, awesome across the board, right? These are fantastic changes, directionally speaking, and plus could be a bit better, but it does solve a bunch of problems that we've got right now, and it should be good moving forward. I would mostly say here, props to Blizzard for actually being willing to do a mid-season update, right, instead of doing the usual, which would usually be them waiting a few more months than they have this time, so that's good. And in terms of what this means for the game, well, I imagine a lot more people will be doing Mythic Plus starting this week. Now that, it feels like there's more of an upfront reward and a solid reason to go and run a ton of keys. So, loot was the systems part of the patch, but what about other rewards? Well, there are changes. Anima has got a slight buff. So if you're Captain Redeemed Souls, the quest for Redeemed Souls will instead give you 500 anima. Yeah, another 500 a week, it's not going to solve the anima drought that a lot of us are feeling, but if you're just kind of doing the bare minimum content, it should help you out substantially. Like if you're a raider, because of the recent anima buff, like you complete your weekly just by, doing the whole raid. But for the people who aren't doing that, it would mean that you could finish your 1000 anima quest by doing the Maw quest, the world boss, and one epic world quest. So that's a bunch faster. Now, speaking of your weekly, maybe you've been thinking, what happens when I hit Renown level 40 and there's no more Renown to get? Will I still do the Renown quest? Well, starting this week, the 1000 anima quest will actually grant you 1500 gold instead of Renown if you're capped on Renown. So it may help pay for a few of your enchants and your flasks, but it is less gold than what a calling usually gives, which feels a little stingy, but it is, decent. I'm glad they put this in. And then finally for rewards, the Wandering Ancient is actually in this patch. Of course, that's the community voted mount that is just going to be unlocked for everybody on day one. The mount looks pretty awesome. Now, of course, everyone's going to have the mount, so it's not going to feel special, but it is a neat mount, so there's that if you'd like that option. Next up, the other focus of this patch was tuning, okay? Specifically, very focused on the Covenants and the Legendaries. And the end result of this, it's less a huge meta shift, and it's more Blizzard trying to bring the Covenants and the Legendaries just a bit closer together. Then, of course, the question is, did they succeed, or will this make matters worse? Well, let's go over the big one first, the Fleshcraft rework. It has been revamped, most likely in response to, Necrolord being the least chosen Covenant out of the 4 across the whole game. So originally this ability was a 20% shield for 2 minutes after channeling for 4 seconds, and it scaled up to 50% with nearby corpses. Well, that's now different. It is now a 40% shield after a 3-second channel, and it also reduces damage taken by 20% during that channel. So bunch of shield and also a DR. Now, that damage reduction is actually quite huge because it's 20% on a 2-minute cooldown. So don't be surprised if you see a lot more Necrolord players in the next race to world first. At least for the classes for whom Necrolord is already kind of strong anyway. And then when it comes to Mythic and even Heroic rating, 20%, there are times where that can actually just make all the difference. So pretty sweet. Now, the rest of the signature abilities remain untouched, but the real change comes from the class abilities, not the signatures, and we'll cover a few of those. Now, the legendary changes are obviously very class-specific, and right now it's very hard to tell, just ahead of time, what's actually going to matter to the meta. I will say, though, it looks like almost every non-meta legendary was buffed, some by a little, others substantially, and what that means is that you should be checking your class discords and your sims at some point next week to see if you've got a new BIS, because I'd say that's a decently likely possibility. Alright, next up we'll go over the important class changes. We'll do the really big ones first, the ones that maybe would make you reconsider Covenant, and then we'll blast through the shorter ones after that. And we've got to start off with the Hunters. So, Hunters get little outside of a slight flayed shot rework, where it basically lasts longer, doesn't cost focus, and buffs the preceding kill shots. Now, this is the point where I'm going to step in for a second and start to worry, because I think this speaks to what could be a wider issue. If Flayed Shot is buffed enough that it beats Wild Spirits in single target, but Wild Spirits is the AoE king, then the Covenant system will absolutely be a pain in the ass for many people like me. Okay? When one is stronger than the other in all situations, it's obviously not ideal, and you don't feel like you've got much of a choice. That's a big problem. But what happens is you make that choice, you go Night Fae, and then the whole thing leaves your mind and you just play the game. But if you were to go into Sanctum of Domination, the next raid, as a Night Fae Hunter, and then maybe find that your single target boss damage is low, then there's going to be a decent chance you're not really feeling great, right? Because you won't be able to, well, change to your AoE in Wild Spirits, or change to your single target easily with Flayed Shot. And that's very different to what is expected in World of Warcraft, which, of course, is that you can do single target versus AoE, talents, legendaries, and even conduits. A little bit more on the fly. I mean, a lot more on the fly. So imagine looking at rankings, looking at logs after raid, and basically just knowing that, yeah, for all these bosses, Night Fae rules the roost. For these other ones, Venthyr. I think that would be quite frustrating to many people. Essentially, the reasons why people, me included, were calling to pull the ripcord, those reasons didn't go away. They were just buried by, the way that balance was, meaning that there wasn't much of a decision because Wild Spirits was so good. Anyway, let's continue. So, Demon Hunter's Necrolord ability has been redesigned. Now, you proc a demon that you can blow up with a Throw Glaive for big damage and healing. That's the sort of thing where the initial version of it, it was a cool concept, but it was deeply flawed, and this one is way more useful, and it is actually fun to play around with. Now, all three of the other abilities were then nerfed for Vengeance. Then we move over to the Monks. Well, Monks have actually lost a big chunk of burst damage as a result of bug fixes. Storm, Earth, and Fire, of course, has been in the game for almost 8 years, and it still suffers from very regularly reported bugs. So, it kind of must suck to be a Windwalker main, because these bug fixes have happened. That's going to mean a damage loss, but there doesn't seem to be a damage buff to make up for it. So I guess we'll see fewer Windwalkers compared to Brewmasters going forward, because, of course, Mystic Touch is still a necessary thing. Then next up, Priests see a big buff to their Night Fae ability. Based on how they were actually using the MDI, this might actually end up making it too strong, but it is definitely niche. I mean, turning cool niches into reliably useful skills should be a good move, although changing up a meta does have its downsides, especially when it comes to those support abilities. Because, of course, Power Infusion is already a controversial enough thing as an ability, that, adding in Fae Guardians to the mix, to some people, that's just going to make the conversation a bit more complicated. So there's that going on. Then for the Rogues, big buffs to the Necrolord and Venthyr abilities. Serrated Bone Spike is getting some number fixes and bug fixes, while Flagellation is getting a slight rework. It will no longer cost energy, it's going to grant you the haste instantly, and it's now a one-use ability instead of needing a second later use. And that essentially means it's a bit less interesting and it does last for a bit less time, but it is stronger and it's easier to use. Then for the Warriors, they are getting their Necrolord banner redesigned. So instead of increasing health and crit for 2 nearby allies, it's now a very big mastery and move speed buff for those allies instead. Now, paired with a damage buff to Prot, and of course the Fleshcraft changes, I'd basically say expect Prot Warriors to be a lot more popular in 9.0.5. I mean, between Battle, Shout, Rally, and Cry, and now the improved flag, yeah, they're real team players. Now, while it's not actually a Covenant change for the Elemental Shamans, they've actually received some pretty major damage buffs to their core spells. So that's pretty good news for them. Then next up, just some smaller class changes. So Resto and Guardian Druids will actually lose some damage because Convoke won't trigger Full Moon for Feral Frenzy. Non-Night Fae Mages do see some decent buffs, but probably not enough to consider switching. Paladins will need a little bit extra mana for Holy Shock, which is now a bit more expensive, but they don't really use that much mana anyway, so they should be golden. And then last but not least, Warlocks get their Venthyr and Necrolord abilities buffed a little, and there's a little boost to demo damage as well. So to boil this down into what you're actually going to see in 9.0.5, you might see a lot more Necrolords, especially across Vengeance, Demon Hunters, and Prot Warriors. Then if you're a hunter who wants single target damage, maybe there will be a consideration to move over to Venthyr. not 100% locked in at this stage though. Then Sub and Outlaw Rogues have a bit more freedom in their pick, and Flavor of the Month Priests might switch, to Night Fae to buff their allies. If you're a Windwalker, you might need to reconsider your relationship with what you're playing. Maybe Blizzard will give you some of the love your spec deserves at some stage. Oh, and you might want to save up that Soul Ash for new legendaries because, of course, some of the balance there could change with the big rebalancing that's happened with the throughput of those legendaries. Okay, Torghast. Torghast has actually not seen anything huge, and it won't till 9.1, but they have added a description of each wing and a recommended item level to the UI. They're also, they've also reduced the number of enemies on many floors, and Venari now has an upgrade that adds teleporters to the big chains in Torghast, so get those and no more whoopsie deaths. As for animate powers, well, the list of changes is actually huge for most classes. There's a bunch of rebalancing, and there's actually some exciting new powers. Blizzard clearly committed to making this a core part of the game, and I think that commitment is actually great to see. It's already a good bit better than it was at launch, and that's of course without the major changes we're expecting with 9.1. I would just slide in and personally say I think it's a humongous pity that this extremely strange version of Torghast has probably turned off a lot of players off Torghast for good. Because a lot of people, they get that bad first impression, and even if, a big patch changes it up a lot, it's probably not going to be enough to convince them, even though I think Torghast could be salvaged into really a fantastic gameplay feature. Next, we got something I didn't think I'd be saying. Battlegrounds are getting a bit of love. And one major PvP player complaint has been solved, at least on the PTR. So the Battleground changes are mostly focused on epic BGs. Wintergrasp in particular is getting some love here, where there's actually big buffs to the attacking side. They're going to start with workshops, and they'll have less durable walls to break down. And that means the defenders will have to be a lot more aggressive to counter the early siege engines, but they actually get a bit of a buff as well, because if they can destroy the attackers' towers, it'll take 8 minutes off the clock, up from 5. And what that essentially means is that they're incentivizing a shorter, more active match, and they're doing a bit of a rebalance in the attacker's favor. Overall, I'd say pretty good. Then Ashran and Isle of Conquest also got some changes. Ashran is now 35v35. I'm sure the servers will hold up, and the mini-boss summon is now half of the cost. Then for Isle of Conquest, it's got the, basically health buffs for the dock vehicles, but also buffs for the keep walls. So to be honest with you, while this stuff isn't massive, I think the fact the team are clearly paying a bit more attention to PvP, I think that does bode well because, where are the battlegrounds? There is more work to be done, and it's good they seem to be just paying attention to that. Now also, the community has been asking for a way to spend excess honor, and at the last second, Blizz came through for you. And that's because on the PTR, there is a vendor that sells Orbirial Distinguishments, which is basically just a pack of 5 Marks of Honor that costs 2,000 honor. So pretty handy for getting all of your Marks of Honor stuff like your transmogs. Alright, opinion time. So what is the verdict from all of this? It's not surprising. It's a stopgap, right? It's a patch that is designed to, improve the current game rather than really add in anything new. And if that is its job, then I think it's mostly a success. Look, we'd all rather have 9.1 be out this week instead, but a solid class balance pass, including, the Covenants and the Legendaries and all of that, improvements to gearing, bunch of tweaks and fixes, that certainly is a good thing. It's a bit unfortunate that it seems like Season 1 of Shadowlands might last for quite a bit of time, or that maybe the team are a bit behind schedule, but I suppose they did say that very shortly after 9.0.5 leaves PTR, 9.1 will hit PTR, so maybe we've got like 2 months, maybe 2.5 months till that patch comes out, and at the very least, we'll actually get to learn something once PTR goes up, and we'll know what the crack is for the future of the game. So, there you go. That is everything you need to know about patch 9.0.5. Hope you found this video useful, and of course check out glassesusa.com with the link that is in this video description for a great deal, and of course for a real awesome handy service. Big thanks to them for sponsoring, and with that said, I will see you next time.